My name is Olivia Miller, and I am 30 years old. The evening my mother discarded my possessions onto the front lawn began like any ordinary shift at the 911 call center. I concluded my night of urgent calls, taking off my headset. I drove home, feeling fatigued yet composed, believing the commotion was finally behind me. I couldn't have been more mistaken. As I pulled onto our street, I saw it: black trash bags and cardboard containers strewn across the yard. My clothes were spilling out, my work shoes lay on the sidewalk, and photographs were scattered and crumpled in the grass. My mother stood on the porch with her arms folded, my sisters beside her, holding up their phones, recording. "There she is," my mom announced, her voice carrying loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Our little freeloader finally came home, 30 years old and still useless to this house. My face flushed with heat as one of my sisters aimed her camera at me, the live stream title shining brightly on her screen: 30-year-old loser finally gets kicked out. My dad stepped forward not to offer assistance, but to toss 2 wrinkled dollar bills at my feet. "Bus fare," he stated. "Get out, don't come back." I didn't scream, nor did I beg. I picked up the money, grabbed the least water-damaged bag I could find, and walked past them without uttering a single word. An hour later, I was on a bus leaving town, my entire life packed into one garbage bag, my phone vibrating with laughing emojis from my family. They were convinced they had rid themselves of their loser. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. Before I reveal what I did next, and why those same individuals were blowing up my phone, begging me to rescue them a year later, please tell me what time it is where you're watching from. I'm curious to see how far this story of a 30-year-old loser will reach. Dad, you always liked to pretend you were the quiet one, the reasonable one, the person who simply went along to maintain peace. But this is the letter where I remind you of who truly kept that house standing. My name is still Olivia, and I'm still 30. However, I am now writing from a modest apartment with my own name on the lease, not yours. I know you recall the night I left, but I wonder if you remember the one just a week before that, the one you thought I slept through. I had just finished a double shift at the call center. I was lying on my bed, still wearing my boots, when I overheard Mom in the kitchen, her voice sharp enough to cut through the wall. "She's almost 30, David. I'm sick of looking at her. If she can't make it on her own by now, that's her problem. You sighed, that annoyed, bored sigh you always directed at me. As long as she keeps paying the mortgage, who cares? You mentioned she covers the utilities, the internet, Sophia's tutoring. Let her stay." It's convenient. Convenient? That word stung worse than loser. I lay there motionless as you continued. If she really wanted to move out, she would have by now. She likes having us to fall back on. You had no idea I had started recording on my phone the moment Mom's voice escalated. You had no idea that every time both of you discussed me as if I were a broken appliance you couldn't return, I saved it. I still have the audio where Mom said, "If she does something stupid to herself, that's her problem. I'm done babying her." You didn't even push back. You just muttered, "She won't. She needs us too much." You were mistaken about that part. You were also mistaken about whose money was holding everything together. Do you recall the college fund Grandma left me? The one meant to help me complete nursing school before I became burnt out and switched to 911 dispatch. I discovered the truth the day that thin white envelope arrived in the mail, past due. My name was on a loan I never signed. A second mortgage taken out for family emergencies. But the only emergency was your poor decisions and Mom's pride. I confronted you in the living room, trembling, waving the letter. "Why is my name on this?" I asked. Mom, of course, interjected first. "We raised you, didn't we? You live here rent-free. This is how you help." But you, Dad, you looked me directly in the eye and said, "You're overreacting. We'll pay it. You owe us after everything we've done." That was the night something within me stopped begging to be recognized as your daughter and started observing you like a problem to be solved. I walked back to my room, shut the door, and opened a folder on my phone I'd never needed before. Receipts. I added screenshots of my bank transfers, the automatic payments I had set up from my paycheck for your mortgage, the electricity bill, the internet, the credit card used for family groceries, all under my name. You labeled me a freeloader and a loser while cashing in my entire 20s. I was the one supporting your life, like a foundation you refused to acknowledge. You thought I would never leave because you believed I couldn't. The truth. I stayed because I hoped you would eventually see me as more than a walking paycheck. You never did. So, I turned your own words into fuel. I didn't scream or set the house ablaze. I simply and quietly gathered everything I would need for the day you threw my belongings onto the lawn and told me to leave. That wasn't the day you cut me off. That was the day I cut you off. Tell me, if you found out your parents had been using your name, your money, your entire youth and still called you a freeloader, would you forgive them, or would you begin to plan? Harper and Sophia, you always claimed I didn't understand social media. You were correct about one thing. I couldn't comprehend how you could turn your own sister into content and still sleep soundly at night. Harper, you're the oldest after me, 27, with a ring light perpetually attached to your hand. Lifestyle creator, you called yourself. I called it talking to your phone while dishes molded in the sink. Sophia, you're 20, the honors student, the baby of the family. The one mom bragged about at every church potluck. Full ride, straight A, future lawyer, she would beam, while I was still trying to figure things out. You too loved that, didn't you? Somewhere between your Instagram and your sibling pranks, I ceased being a person and became a punchline. Remember that series you did, Harper? Living with a 30-year-old roommate. Episode after episode of you walking into my room without knocking, filming my night shifts at the computer, my takeout containers, my second-hand clothes. POV, your sister is 30 and still lives with mom and dad, you'd caption, garnering millions of views. I watched those videos in the dark, jaw clenched, while you cackled in the hallway because a sponsorship offered you free skincare for bullying me. Sophia, you weren't as boisterous, but you were just as cutting. You'd roll your eyes when I drove you to your study sessions, posting boomerangs of my beat-up car adorned with "Pray for Me" stickers. When your friends visited, you'd introduce me as the backup plan in case you need rides. Never once as my sister, who works nights to pay for this house. The night you all tossed my possessions into the yard wasn't your first performance. It was just the first time the mask slipped for the entire neighborhood. What you failed to grasp was that your content was my evidence. While you were laughing at your own captions, I was screen recording. Every video where you called me a loser. Every live stream where mom yelled in the background about me being a burden. Every comment from your followers making fun of me. I saved them all in the same folder as Dad's recordings. Receipts. Months later, when my life was no longer tied to that house, I created 2 anonymous email addresses and a fake Instagram account with no posts, no followers. I attached those clips and sent them to the brands that sponsored you, Harper, the ones you boasted about at dinner. I didn't lie. I didn't edit. I simply wrote, "Thought you should see how your influencer talks about mental health, family, and losers in her own home." I also forwarded them to the dean's office at Sophia's college when they sent out that significant email regarding community values and their anti-bullying policy. Again, I didn't need to add anything. Your words were sufficient. The very videos you used to prove your superiority became the reason doors were shut in your faces. When you went live that night and called me a 30-year-old loser, you believed you were documenting my lowest moment. In reality, you were documenting your own. So, here's what I want to ask you and everyone listening. If your siblings turned your humiliation into a joke for strangers on the internet, would you tolerate it for the sake of family? Or would you ever so calmly let the right people see exactly who they are when the camera is rolling? Sarah Brooks picked me up from the bus station at 2:17 a.m. I held one trash bag, the plastic stretched white at the edges, my phone at 5% battery. My eyes were stinging from not crying. We hadn't seen much of each other since college, but she didn't ask a single question when I texted, "Can I crash for a few days? I'll explain later." She pulled up in her dusty blue sedan, leaned over to open the passenger door, and simply said, "Get in." Sarah works at a credit union downtown, the kind of steady job my family always claimed I wasn't smart enough to get. As soon as we arrived at her tiny one-bedroom apartment, she gestured toward the couch. "Showers down the hall. Tomorrow we talk. Tonight you sleep." The next day, I shared everything: the yard, the live stream, the $2, the loan notice with my name on it. Her jaw tightened in a way I'd never witnessed before. "Olivia, what's your social security number?" she asked softly. I frowned. "Do you have it?" She pressed. I did. She entered it into her work laptop the following day during her lunch break, while I sat across from her with a paper cup of coffee I couldn't taste. "I'm not doing anything shady," she assured me, "but if they ran anything significant under your name, it would appear on your credit report." She turned the screen toward me. There it was, the second mortgage. My name listed as co-borrower, a store card I never opened, a personal loan taken out 3 years ago for house repairs that actually paid for Harper's camera equipment and Sophia's test prep courses. "They signed for you," Sarah said quietly. "I'm guessing they told the loan officer you were at work and they'd get your actual signature later, or forged it. Either way, they dragged your credit through the mud." I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. My 20s, all those double shifts, the skipped meals, the nights I worked sick because we can't afford for you to miss a day. All of it used as if it meant nothing. "You can report them," Sarah suggested. "Identity theft fraud, it would trigger an investigation. They could get into serious trouble." I pictured my mother in handcuffs, my dad being escorted out of his job. For a moment, it felt satisfying. Then another image formed, my parents playing victims to anyone who would listen. "She's trying to ruin us after everything we did for her." The same narrative, just louder. No, my revenge wouldn't be a loud explosion. It would be a controlled burn. "What happens if I just stop?" I asked. "Stop what?" Sarah replied. "Stop paying for everything," I clarified. "Disconnect my paycheck from their mortgage. Close the joint account they use. Freeze every card with my name on it. What happens then?" Sarah's lips parted in a slow, dangerous smile. "Then they'll face the real cost of their lifestyle," she said. That night, we sat at her kitchen table with my laptop and a cheap printer between us. I logged into my bank and deactivated every automatic payment linked to their address. Mortgage, utilities, Wi-Fi, groceries, all gone. I contacted the credit card company and had my name removed as an authorized user. I opened a brand new account at Sarah's credit union with only my name on it. My paycheck moved with me. I filed a fraud alert on my credit. Nothing dramatic, just enough to ensure no new loans could be opened in my name without a phone call to my personal number. No shouting, no accusations, just unplugging. The following week, I used the money I was no longer sending home to put down a deposit on a small studio apartment 30 minutes from the call center. I took extra overnight shifts, the kind no one else wanted, piled up my overtime, and for the first time in my life, every dollar I earned actually stayed with me. Sarah slid a cheap spiral notebook across the table. "Write it all down," she instructed. "Not just what they did, but what you're going to do." At the top of the first page, I wrote 7 letters I'll never send. "Cut them off, collect proof, build my own life. When they fall, don't catch them. Make them ask. Make them remember." Then I underlined one sentence 3 times. "Never again let people who call you a loser spend your hard-earned money." So here's my question for you. If you discovered your own family had quietly built their entire lifestyle on your back, would you keep paying to maintain peace? Or would you start saying no and let the consequences hit them instead of you? I used to believe that house was the only place I'd ever belong. Beige siding, squeaky porch step, the smell of burnt coffee and cheap candles. I thought if I just worked harder, contributed more, they'd eventually look at me and see someone worth respecting. Instead, that house became a classroom, and the main lesson was this: love without respect is just control in a prettier outfit. After I moved into my studio, my life shrunk in square footage but expanded everywhere else. The place was small enough that if I stretched out my arms, I could almost touch both walls. But it was mine. My name on the lease, my key in the lock. No one banging on the door demanding rides or money or explanations. I worked. I slept. I ate freezer meals on the floor for a while, and I saved. I picked up weekend shifts training new dispatchers. I started an online course in crisis communication, the kind of extra certification my supervisor hinted could lead to a promotion. Every exam I passed went onto a growing stack of papers on my desk. Every pay stub went into a folder labeled Olivia's future, not house bills. Months passed without a word from my family, which I knew didn't signify silence. It meant simmering. I received the first indication of the boil 3 months after I left, a screenshot from Sarah. "Is this about you?" she asked. It was a next-door post from Mom, a dramatic paragraph about ungrateful children and kids these days who abandon the parents who raised them. No names, of course, but the comments were full of sympathy. "You did your best, Susan. Some kids just don't appreciate what they have." I said nothing. Another 3 weeks and a late-night text arrived from an unknown number. "Your parents' power got shut off for non-payment." It read, "Are you okay?" It was a neighbor from across the street. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I finally replied, "I don't live there anymore. They'll figure it out." And they did, by asking around, by borrowing, by scrambling. But they couldn't figure it out with my money anymore. Revenge at that stage was simple, not saving people who would never save me. But I'd be lying if I said I stopped there. Remember those recordings? The ones where Mom called me a burden and Dad said I was convenient as long as she pays. The clips of Harper laughing about her pathetic 30-year-old roommate. The comments where her followers piled on. One evening, I sat on my futon, pulled up the parent next-door group for Sophia's college that Mom boasted about all the time, and made a brand new account with no profile picture. I uploaded a 30-second clip, Harper's live stream, where Mom yelled, "If she does something to herself, that's on her, I'm done." Harper laughed into the camera and said, "Sorry guys, my sister's having another meltdown." I added a single caption, "Do your kids talk about family like this?" I didn't need to state who they were. People recognized them. Moms who'd sat next to mine at award ceremonies. Parents whose kids followed Harper online. An hour later, the video had been shared into a mental health awareness group and onto the college's unofficial page. Comments flooded in, "This is cruel. If my kids talked like this, I'd be ashamed. Isn't this the same Susan Miller who gives parenting advice in here?" I closed the app and went to bed. I didn't check again for days. Meanwhile, I kept building. 6 months out, I got promoted to shift supervisor. My paycheck jumped. I started setting aside a separate savings account labeled down payment. Not because I knew exactly what I was going to buy yet, but because owning something of my own felt like the purest form of revenge. Not revenge on them. Revenge on the version of me who believed I'd never be able to stand on my own. Every time I logged into my bank account and saw my balances go up instead of disappearing into someone else's bills, I felt a little less like the loser they said I was, and a little more like someone dangerous, a woman with options. Let me ask you this. If the same house where you were called a loser for years started falling apart without your money, would you rush back with a toolbox? Or would you stand on the sidewalk of your new life and finally let it crumble? You created that group chat to send memes and gossip and passive-aggressive reminders that I was missing out on family time. For months after I left, it was quiet. I stayed in it, muted just to observe. At first, it was the usual pictures of Sophia's campus, Harper's brand deals, Mom's decorated holiday table, little jabs slipped in sometimes. A photo of an empty chair at Thanksgiving with the caption, "Reserved for our missing daughter." A shot of Harper's new ring light with, "At least someone in this house is chasing their dreams." I typed and deleted replies so many times. Then, around month 8, the tone shifted. It began with Mom posting a blurry picture of an envelope from the bank. "Has anyone talked to him today?" She wrote. No one answered. 2 days later, "Mortgage is late again, they changed the rules, bank is harassing us." I knew they hadn't changed the rules, they just changed the person. Dad finally chimed in. "I'll figure something out," he wrote. Then an hour later, a message only to me, not the group. "You know your name is on this, right? If the house goes under, it hits your credit too." My fingers shook, but not from fear this time. I'd already talked to Sarah. We'd already confirmed that because they'd lied and used my credit, it was their legal problem. "Now, you should have thought about my credit before you took out loans without asking me," I replied. Good luck. I anticipated an explosion. Instead, there was silence. Then, little by little, the chat transformed from flexes to cracks. Harper posted less about sponsorships and more about brands ghosting. One afternoon, I received a direct message from a girl who used to attend our church. "Hey, isn't this your sister? Her ad for that skincare brand just got pulled. People are dragging her for bullying." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew exactly which anonymous email had initiated that. Sophia's crisis came next. At 11:07 p.m. on a Tuesday, Mom dropped a message into the group chat like a bomb. They took her scholarship. She followed it with a screenshot of an official notice from the college. Due to conduct inconsistent with our community values, it began, attached a complaint concerning online harassment and clips making fun of a relative's mental well-being. It wasn't hard to figure out which recordings the committee had seen. "This is entirely your doing," Mom texted me in private. "Had you simply remained and offered assistance, none of this would be taking place." I gazed at her message for an extended period. My response was a single sentence. "If you had regarded me as your daughter rather than mere content and a source of income, none of this would be unfolding." I silenced the conversation once more. 3 months onward, notifications regarding foreclosure procedures began arriving from the bank. Since my signature graced that ill-fated document, I received them as well. Yet, due to the fraud alert and Sarah's intervention, I now possessed alternatives. They, however, had none. This brings us to the morning depicted in the story's opening. A year after the evening they tossed my possessions into the lawn, I awoke in my studio apartment to 3 blaring alarms. My primary phone, my more affordable secondary phone, and my company device all vibrated on the bedside table. 6:30 a.m. Mom, 36 unreceived calls and a text. "Please, you must rescue us. They are seizing the house. You're the sole person capable of resolving this." 8:30 a.m. Dad, "I made a mistake. Please return home. The bank indicated they might cooperate if you sign." 10:45 a.m. Harper, "Please, Olivia, we require your help. My channel is defunct. Sophia cannot return to college, and Mom is falling apart. Assist us. You can't truly just observe as we forfeit everything." I observed those messages intently, drinking coffee I purchased with my earnings, inside an apartment I financed with my funds, seated on a used couch I acquired with my savings. Following that, I accessed an email from Sarah containing a single statement. "The foreclosure auction is scheduled for next week. You have preliminary approval. Therefore, I pose this question to you. If the very family who branded you worthless and cast your existence into the street abruptly implored you to sign the necessary papers and rescue them, would you comply? Or would you ultimately allow them to experience the consequences of your departure?" The steps of the courthouse were bustling on the morning of the auction. Businessmen with clipboards were present, along with a handful of curious neighbors loitering at the group's periphery. I spotted our former mail carrier, Mrs. Green, from directly opposite and positioned to one side, appearing as though they hadn't slept in days, my family. Mom's hair was hastily pulled into a disheveled bun. She wore no makeup, and her eyes were bloodshot. Dad's shirt was creased, his tie askew. Harper donned sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Sophia clung to a pile of documents against her chest, as if their tight grip might alter their circumstances. Initially, they didn't notice me. I positioned myself toward the rear, my hands tucked into the pockets of my simple black jacket, Sarah accompanying me. "You aren't obligated to face this by yourself," she had remarked when I shared my intentions with her. The auctioneer quickly announced a succession of properties before reaching ours. A single-family residence, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, starting bid. My childhood abode was presented as just another item on the registry. Once the opening price was declared, a man in a gray business suit raised his hand. Another bidder joined in. The amount incrementally rose. It was then that I advanced. "I bid," I murmured to the clerk, lifting my designated paddle. Sarah gave my arm a comforting squeeze. From my peripheral vision, I observed Mom pivot, narrow her eyes, and then become motionless. "Olivia," she breathed, as if uttering my name could cause me to vanish. The competition for bids concluded swiftly. Our residence wasn't situated in an upscale district, and given the prevailing market conditions, no one was eager to bid excessively. I, however, proceeded because I wasn't merely acquiring walls and a ceiling. I was securing the authority to determine the significance of that location for the remainder of my existence. The auctioneer brought his gavel down decisively. Sold. An odd, empty quietude ensued. Documents were endorsed. My name appeared on a property deed for the inaugural time in my life, and it wasn't as a joint holder or a contingency. It was exclusively mine. When I eventually approached my family, Mom's expression contorted. You purchased it," she stuttered. "So you'll transfer it back to us, won't you? We can negotiate a solution. You can relocate back home. We can begin anew." For a fleeting moment, I glimpsed the version of myself who would have eagerly seized that opportunity. The young woman who would have accepted any fragment of affection, any prospect of affiliation, even if it entailed returning directly into peril. She remained present within me, diminished and weary. However, she no longer held command. "No," I stated composedly. "I acquired it for myself." Dad moved nearer, his voice breaking with despair. "We are your parents. We committed errors, but we remain a family. Do not do this. We will forfeit everything." I gazed past him at the house, visible above the vehicles lining the street, the porch where I once sat following arduous shifts, the window of the room where I lay sleepless, overhearing them scheme about how to utilize my funds, the section of grass where my possessions sat in refuse bags a year prior. "You forfeited me a considerable time ago," I responded. "This is merely administrative closure." Harper removed her sunglasses, her eyes gleaming. "We uttered those remarks for the camera, all right? They were merely jests. You understand how the internet operates. Please do not be vindictive." Sarah, in fact, chuckled at that comment. I did not. "You labeled me a failure before 100,000 unfamiliar individuals," I stated. "You exploited me for viewership. You spent my earnings on your ideal existence. This is not vindictiveness. This is me, at last, accepting what you communicated to me, that I am beholden to you for nothing." Sophia attempted an alternative approach. "I will be forced to withdraw," she declared, her voice faint. "I cannot commute from an apartment across town while managing work and academics. You are destroying my prospects." My former self would have offered an apology. My current self offered a slight shrug. "You will manage," I replied. "Isn't that precisely what all of you conveyed to me? That if I genuinely desired a superior life, I would ensure its realization." I did not leave them entirely without shelter. I am not the antagonist in this narrative, irrespective of how they might recount it. I presented them with a choice. "There is a property manager you may consult," I informed Dad, extending a business card I had commissioned the previous week. "If you wish to remain, you may submit an application like any other renters. Market rate rent, a formal lease, regulations, none involving my identity, none involving my finances." Mom's jaw dropped. "You anticipate us to compensate you for residing in our own dwelling." I met her gaze. "You anticipated me to compensate you for labeling me a failure." I articulated gently. "This appears more equitable." Then I turned to depart. A week subsequently, I toured the vacant rooms with a contractor, discussing soundproofing and electrical systems. That residence is destined to become something entirely new now. A facility for training and support, catering to dispatchers, nurses, and initial responders who lack a tranquil environment to decompress. A sanctuary where individuals who absorb others' most challenging experiences can at last find solace. The very walls that once heard my mother denounce me as a burden will now resonate with different sounds, people reassuring one another that they are not solitary. Occasionally, retaliation manifests as demolition. Mine, however, appears as refurbishment. It resembles transforming the site where I was shattered into a haven that aids others in their recovery. Regarding my family, they relocated to a confined rented dwelling on the outskirts of the community. Rumors circulated concerning the videos, the debts, and the auction. Certain individuals still harbor sympathy for them. Others believe I proceeded excessively. They remain unaware of the nights I spent sleepless, contemplating whether I had indeed mutated into the fiend they claimed me to be. They are ignorant of how many instances I nearly telephoned and conceded, "All right, I will rectify it." Yet each time self-doubt begins to creep in, I recall standing in that yard, my entire existence contained within refuse bags, as my own parents chuckled and my siblings broadcasted it live to unfamiliar audiences. I recall the $2 at my feet. I recall the conviction. If I survive this, I will never again permit them to control me. This final message isn't truly directed at them. It's for you. The individual labeled a failure because you haven't met their expectations. The one settling household expenses in a residence where gratitude is never expressed. The person who continually diminishes themselves to conform to a family that values you only for your utility. I am not instructing you to acquire their property from beneath them. I am not asserting that my approach to retribution must align with yours. However, I am stating this unequivocally. You possess the right to cease subsidizing your own mistreatment. You possess the right to distance yourself from individuals who prefer to demean you rather than assist you. You possess the right to construct a life so robust that they are compelled to seek you out and acknowledge their transgressions. So, here is my concluding inquiry. If those who branded you a burden for years abruptly required you for their very survival, would you hasten back to rescue them? Or would you, at last, prioritize yourself and permit them to experience the existence they attempted to impose upon you? The antagonists in this narrative, Olivia's mother, father, and sisters, are not cinematic monsters. They represent the type of individuals many audience members regrettably encounter in reality. They exploit her financially, ridicule her openly, and acknowledge her worth only when in dire straits. Their unkindness and hubris demonstrate the outcome when self-importance supplants compassion, and familial ties serve as a pretext for abuse. Nonetheless, their collapse conveys a profound instruction. Contempt invariably exacts a cost. Genuine affection is demonstrated through deeds, not declarations. The beneficial insight is evident. Appreciate those who treat you with benevolence. Safeguard your self-esteem, and never relinquish your self-respect merely to gain acceptance.